Violent clashes.
Sweden's gang wars.
In a series of explosions linked to a gang war.
Till mina fucking bröder som har väntat på mig. Jag kommer köra med er till döden. Till er grabbar som har bytt lag. Jag kommer jaga er tills jag dödar era
Det här är en svår tid för Sverige.
So Sweden has turned into a country that other countries use as an example of the negative effects of immigration. And this is a sentiment that really has changed in the last few years since I moved here. When I was younger, the media coverage of Sweden was mostly about meatballs, IKEA, PewDiePie.
What a fucking nick.
And just general positivity about how cool and advanced the society was in terms of tech. Klarna, right? You're in debt. All those bills you keep missing. You can blame Sweden for that. I moved from Nigeria to Sweden in 2015, so I have first-hand experience of the challenges with integration and the controversy surrounding immigration. But what's really happening? Is immigration contributing to crime? Is Sweden cooked? Is this perhaps more complicated than we think it is? Let's break it down. Before we start, I would like to thank this video's sponsor. Nobody. I have 170 subscribers.
Oh, hell no, man.
What did you expect?
Did you know that Sweden is the gun crime capital of Europe? Safe old Sweden. Not so safe anymore.
I did see this video and I didn't believe it until I actually searched, Googled around a bit, and it turns out it is true. You know what? Let's play a game. I will present different crimes, right? And yes, you watching the video in your living room or probably sitting on the toilet, go to the comments and then type your 3 guesses, all right? So we're gonna guess different crimes and then try to figure out which countries we believe are ranked top 3. So I'll tell your crime and then you tell me the 3 top countries. And just so you don't cheat, I do want you to leave a comment so we can keep each other accountable, right? Because trust is very important to any relationship. You have to trust me and I need to be able to trust you as well. All of this data is coming from Eurostat. Just want to point out that I do think it's very funny that in this database, Sweden is said to have the 5th highest crime index in Europe, while Ukraine, a country literally in a war zone, is ranked as
7th place.
And then Russia, in its imperial glory, is ranked as
the 16th.
Right behind Germany. So maybe take all of this data with a grain of salt. All right, we're good? Let's begin. All right, we're gonna start with number 1, sexual violence. It's Sweden in first place at 200 cases, Iceland at 165, and then France at 126. 2, kidnapping. Number 1 is Luxembourg. Pretty sure none of you guessed that right. And I was kind of surprised because I've always been told it's a rich country. Although maybe it does kind of make sense, right? Number 2 is Germany and 3 is Portugal. Belgium actually even had higher cases than Luxembourg between 2013 and 2017. But after 2017, I couldn't find any statistics. So I guess this solved the problem. Number 3, Bulgaria. All right, so Sweden is number 1. Luxembourg is number 2, and then Austria. So I'm guessing that you're starting to realize that this wasn't an easy game. Back to talking about Sweden. It's easy to look at the increase in crime statistics and the rise in Sweden's immigrant population and simply say, well, this is obviously the reason. This is in fact what many politicians have been doing. However, attributing this solely to immigration ignores critical socioeconomic factors. Correlation does not equal causation. This is one of the fundamental principles of statistical analysis that often gets overlooked in public discourse. When ice cream sales go up, drowning incidents also go up. But eating ice cream doesn't cause drowning. The real cause is hot weather, which makes people buy more ice cream and swim more. So when we're trying to prove that 2 things are linked, we need more evidence than just the surface level data. So if we just try to correlate the increase in immigrants and the increase in crime, we're kind of making a mistake. Here's something that I'm pretty sure you didn't know. The way we report crime in Sweden almost inflates the data. If a man sexually assaults his partner 365 days in a year, okay, in Sweden that is 365 cases, whereas in some other countries it's considered 1 case, where in some other countries it is not the case because they believe that you cannot sexually assault your own partner.
Habibi, come to Dubai.
Aside from this higher level of trust in the police in Sweden, it has been going down over the years, but compared to most countries in the EU, it is quite high. And this means that people report crimes a lot more often because they believe that the crimes are going to get solved. So now I'll give my personal experience for the sake of legality. I just want to make it clear that this opinion does not mean it's 100% correct. It doesn't represent what my employers or my friends might share. All right, good. I definitely feel like crime has gotten worse in the past few years, but I don't really think it's as bad as people say it is. When it comes to my integration into the Swedish society, the part that I struggled with the most was actually learning the language. When I first moved there, I was put into a program. There's two programs in Sweden, two major ones. There's one called SFI, which is Svenska för invandrare, and there's a second one called SAS, which is Swedish as a second language. So I got put into a program like this with a bunch of other people who also moved to the country who couldn't speak Swedish. Most of them spoke Arabic and other languages that I couldn't speak. So what ended up happening was everyone just grouped up with the people from their similar countries that we could communicate with, not because we didn't want to spend time with each other, but because we literally couldn't understand each other. And this is why I think part of the problem is everyone in my class were people who moved to Sweden recently, but were also learning the language. And this definitely did hamper my ability to get better at Swedish quickly. The difficult thing is I don't even know if there's a good way to solve this problem that wouldn't kind of be a disadvantage to people who already speak Swedish. You can't just mix everybody up in the class from day one, right? It wouldn't be fair to people who just came. It wouldn't be fair to people who are here already. But despite all of this, what was very clear to me was that the people in my gymnasium, my high school, who went to the regular Swedish classes, 1 year 1, year 2, and year 3, who didn't come through the immigrant line, they very clearly looked down on us. They didn't associate with us. It was almost like having two schools in one school. And all throughout the years I was in that school, I didn't make one Swedish friend. All of the friends I had were people who also moved to Sweden because we just felt like we had more in common. And you can quite easily see how this happens to a lot of people as well. If you want to integrate in Sweden, it is possible, but it's definitely not as easy as it could be. Swedes are very known for being very reserved and quiet people once there's not any alcohol involved. Many Swedes stick to the friends they had from their childhood, and they stick to those for the rest of their lives. When you come to Sweden as an older person, it's a lot harder to make new friend groups if it's not people who are actively trying to find friends, which usually also tend to be immigrants who just came here and don't want to die from depression because it's dark outside, right? Anyways, at 18, I got into university and I was able to start working towards a future for myself and started making some friends. I got a part-time job that allowed me to communicate with actual people, customers, and practice my Swedish and get better. When I first came here, we lived in Norsborg, and then eventually moved further down to the south. And years later, like the news, I actually found out that I was apparently living in the hood. I didn't know this whole time. All I noticed was just that there were more people who were not Swedish living there, but I didn't feel like unsafe. But I also know that that's because like I'm a big black man and most people think that I'm the criminal. But I still do very much know that it has changed since 2015. A very good friend of mine who lives not too far away from me told me a story that I felt was crazy. He was walking back from the gym one night and a car rolled up to him, right? And they were saying something in Arabic and he didn't understand. So he stops like, what do you guys want? And then two people jump out of the car, run up to him and basically point a gun to his head. And then one of them is like, oh, it's not him. And then the two of them run back into the car and they leave. And he was just frozen there for a couple of minutes, he said to me. And this is something that happens. This is like, it doesn't happen to everybody. There's not a lot of people that look like this, my friend, but it still goes to show that the fact that can even happen in Sweden is crazy, that you could mistakenly get shot for looking like the wrong person. Personally, the worst kind of crimes that I have experienced has mostly just been people breaking into my basement. There's been these fuckers that have been breaking into my basement like twice a year. It seems like a ritual for them. I don't know what that is about. But every time we call the police say, oh, well, everyone in your area has this problem. Reach out to your insurance. And then when we call them, they say we should call the police. So they keep just throwing me around in circles. So a lot of things like petty crimes that weren't petty before but have become petty crimes because people are more and more getting used to just the bad stuff happening. So that's pretty much the worst thing I have experienced, but that doesn't speak for the population. But it still goes to show everybody I know has been affected in one way or another by the crime happening in Sweden. So definitely is a problem. Sweden for a very long time accepted people from all over the world without filtering for personal values, right? And there's this very unique thing that we have in Sweden, which is people who genuinely do not like Sweden. And I don't mean they don't like the weather because it's dark outside. That's everybody, right? Even Swedes. I hate the darkness. But there's people who move here and they do not like the values, right? The values of freedom and self-expression. They do not like the people, right? They think Swedes are awful. They do not like the men, the women. They don't like anything about the people living here. And I think that's something that is very, very rare if you look at the grand scheme of things, because most people who move somewhere choose that place. There's been crimes that I've heard that honestly speaking, I couldn't believe happened in Sweden. Not so long ago, I'll put up a picture here, but...
Hej Insta. 22-åriga Shahida mördades i småländska Lessebo. Hennes mamma, pappa och bror misstänks ha mördat henne för att bevara familjens heder. Polisen. När Shahida hittades död i ett vindskydd i maj 2024 hade hennes kropp blivit bränd 2 gånger. När polisen avlyssnade föräldrarnas telefoner hörs de säga till varandra: smutsen är borta, nu är smutsen död.
There was this story of a family that killed together. The family killed their daughter and then burned her twice. Because she went to gymnasium, they didn't like the fact that she was educated, they didn't like the man she chose to marry, and they didn't like the fact that she moved away from them to basically not be physically and emotionally abused 24/7. So they killed her and burned her twice. Sometimes I do find myself thinking, perhaps we genuinely have let people into the country who cannot be integrated because they don't want to be integrated. But it's still very difficult to have a conversation because of all the sensationalization going on in the news at the moment. But when has this not been the case? But at the moment in Sweden, the public opinion is very fractured on this topic. So I did a bit of research to try to understand, is there any relation between immigrants in Sweden and this increased wave of crime, right? Are immigrants the problem? So in a second, I'll tell you what the research shows. In the 1840s, a massive wave of Irish immigrants arrived in the US. Due to the Great Potato Famine, many settled in New York, Boston, and Chicago, taking low-wage jobs in factories and as laborers. Irish neighborhoods were labeled as crime-ridden, and Irishmen were stereotyped as drunk, violent criminals. Native-born Americans accused Irish immigrants of driving down wages and taking jobs. Because the Irish were Catholics and they were feared as being loyal to the Pope over American democracy, this resulted in the rise of anti-immigrant groups like the Know Nothing Party in the 1850s, which promoted nativist policies. Newspapers depicted them like ape-like, lazy, and dangerous. However, over time, essentially what the Americans call black people now, over time, Irish Americans assimilated and eventually became part of the American political and cultural mainstream. In the late 1800s, Chinese laborers were recruited to build railroads and work in mines in the western US. By the 1870s, economic downturns led to resentment against those same Chinese workers that had built up the country in certain ways. Chinese workers were seen as driving down wages because they worked for less. Still kind of do. Chinatowns were also accused of spreading prostitution, opium dens, and organized crime. And the Chinese were labeled as unable to integrate. Because their customs were seen as alien and threatening. And all of this resulted in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. The first major US immigration restriction law, banning Chinese immigrants for decades. This also resulted in a lot of violence against the Chinese communities, including the Rock Springs Massacre in 1885, where 28 Chinese miners were killed by a mob in Wyoming. I'm willing to bet you see similarities to the conversations we're having today over 200 years later. I mean, we just had a shooting in Sweden where the terrorist, and I repeat, the terrorist specifically attacked minorities. Also, don't forget Italians who were moving to the US were treated the exact same way. And to top it off, Mexicans in the US, all the way from the 1930s to today, have been accused of taking American jobs, and people are being deported as we speak right now. I could also talk about Indians and Pakistani immigrants to the UK, Algerians in France who are accused of not adopting French culture, but for the sake of the length of this video, I'll stop here. I think that I've made the point I'm trying to get across, which is the trend over time is that these communities integrate, contribute, and eventually become part of the national identity, but each new wave of immigrants face similar accusations. What the research actually suggests is no. According to a study by Hellsten and these other amazing writers, the overrepresentation of immigrants in Swedish crime statistics can be largely explained by socioeconomic disadvantages rather than cultural factors. The study followed individuals who completed compulsory schooling in Stockholm between 1990 and 1993 and found that 50 to 80% of crime differences could be explained by their parents, socioeconomic resources, and the neighborhood that they grew up in, so segregation. Factors such as poverty, limited education, and living in high-crime neighborhoods were far more predictive of criminal behavior. For females with immigrant backgrounds, the study found that social inequality almost entirely explained the gap in crime rates between native Swedes and non-native Swedes. For males, while the differences were mostly accounted by for socioeconomic factor, a small portion remained unexplained. potentially due to discrimination or unmeasured individual experiences. So essentially, for women, it makes no difference if you're born in Sweden or not. Whereas for males, around 75% of the crimes committed has no bearing on the person's origin if you remove certain factors. Economic segregation creates environments where crime can flourish. I mean, we see the same conversation in the USA when people discuss crime rates, hoods, and African Americans. And this makes sense when you consider that during the same period that Sweden saw increased immigration, it also experienced significant changes in income inequality, housing segregation, and access to social services. These factors have been consistently linked to crime rates across all populations, yet they receive far less attention in political discourse. Number two is that no one is really doing anything to make the housing market in Sweden easier to get into in a way that doesn't just reduce prices for people who already own houses. We don't build more reasonably priced housing or apartments in nicer places that people would properly integrate into. Here's what I think. I think the real story behind all of these statistics and debates about immigration and crime is, at the end of the day, about class. The only true dividing line in our society is class. While we argue about immigration policies and crime rates, there's a whole lot of part of the conversation that we're not having about how wealth is being distributed in the world. As of 2024, the richest 1% own more wealth than the other 99% combined. The system isn't broken, it is working exactly as it has been designed. Throughout history, the wealthy have used the exact same playbook, divide and conquer. In the 1870s, America, it was the Irish and Chinese. In the 1930s, in Germany, we know who they blamed. Today, it's different groups, but the same story. We sit and fight amongst ourselves about immigration, while the rich quietly continue accumulating more wealth and power that is passed down across generations. What I personally believe is that most people just want a decent job with fair pay, a roof over our heads, healthcare when we're sick, the ability to provide for our families, and a chance at having a better future for our children. And I don't think these are immigrant values or native values. I think these are just human values. So the next time you hear someone blaming immigrants for society's problems, I want you to ask yourself, who benefits from us fighting each other? Who profits while everyone is distracted? Because as long as we're divided fighting over crumbs, we're never going to address the real issue, an economic system that's concentrating more and more wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And I'm not trying to say all billionaires are evil or create some kind of conspiracy theory. I think it's about understanding the fact that every second we spend fighting about immigration and not actually creating solutions, we're taking away time that could be spent discussing and figuring out why housing costs rose 300% faster than wages, why young people can't afford to start families, why our healthcare system in Sweden is understaffed. Seriously, it takes way too long to get anything done. Immigration has been constant throughout human history, and it will continue to be constant. The only real choice we face isn't about immigration, it's about whether we'll finally recognize our common interest, because at the end of the day, what we all want is the same thing, a chance at a decent life, and I think that's something that's worth fighting for.
Anti-Semitic